Hi everyone, I'm Madeline from the Brain Trainer team, and I'm thrilled to bring you today's episode featuring our hosts, Norman Valdez and Alex Wright, joined by special guest Neil Price, the co-founder and executive director of Logical Outcomes, a nonprofit consultancy redefining how organizations engage with data and evaluation. Neil's work is anchored in one core principle, that communities should own their data stories. In today's episode, we'll trace Neil's path to logical outcomes and explore key themes like the challenges and opportunities that come with adopting AI in the nonprofit sector, the value of open source and collaborative innovation, and what it takes to make data sovereignty a reality in the systems we design and build together. All right, let's get started.
All right, welcome everybody. We're here again with Neil Price and Alex.
Yeah, we usually always start off with asking a question because is partially because we're interested in, but we think it's useful for people who are kind of finding their voice in AI. Can you share a little bit more about your journey that led you to really being focused on this?
Sure.
Really through the lens of AI for social impact, but leading logical outcome. Was there really a particular moment or experience that led you down this path, being interested in it?
Well, as a nonprofit organization that's been around for 11 years or so, Logical Outcomes has always been interested in evaluation as our core purpose. We work with other nonprofits, mostly small and medium-sized organizations, to gather information about their programs and hopefully use that information to improve their services. So that's always been our core work. But technology and using technology to enhance that work to, in many ways, reduce burden, in particular work burden, administrative burden, evaluation burden. Technology has always been core to what we do. Our co-founder, Dr. Gillian Kerr, has always kept us sort of thinking about technology and ways in which we can use it to further our work. So I think just very naturally and organically, um, out of that interest came our more recent work in AI. And we see ourselves as not necessarily AI specialists. We work with amazing engineers and developers. We have in house expertise, but really, we see ourselves as an intermediary organization to work alongside the nonprofit sector, to be in a community of organizations that are thinking about AI, thinking about its impact, thinking about practical, useful application of these very powerful tools. So, that's kind of been the organic trajectory out of that evaluation work, working with the sector, and now continuing to think deeply about AI.
Can you engage with nonprofits in the social impact sector? What are some of the reasons you think that you see as barriers for which organizations are not, let's say, as many as we would like them to be adopting AI or seeing themselves as part of the of these technologies innovation? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, I wouldn't be alone in saying that technology is not readily adopted first and foremost in the nonprofit sector. One, it often requires a certain amount of expertise that's often not within those organizations. They're focused on doing the work that's often not tech driven. So there's that. Two, the costs associated with not only building capacity but investing in the technology presents a very serious barrier for nonprofits. And then I would also add, there's often mistrust. I'll just put it plainly about technology. There's often a kind of mistrust around who's behind the technology, how is it being used, where the data that goes into the technology is being used, how is it being used. There's lots of questions for very obvious reasons. If we think about the histories of racialized communities, indigenous communities, Black communities, if we think about ways in which technology has often been used to cause harm, uh, and we layer that onto this emergent technology, you can see why there's the barrier of mistrust.
We often speak at Community Foundations of Canada about the need for being connective tissue, or what you just mentioned, being the translator, which is especially between technologists that have the technical expertise, but don't necessarily are in touch with what's important on the impact side, on the ground, on thematically, as well as on the nonprofit side that may sit on a lot of the on the ground and immense expertise on thematically, but connecting the two. And I also know that you're really thinking through how can you have the biggest impact, thinking through open source and how does that influence, how are you specifically and intentionally thinking through being the role as connector, as translator, as connective tissue, and how do you see your focus on open source or data commons and really providing solutions that are impact first being unique in a development role?
Yeah, so we've always been interested in open source approaches, tools for a couple of reasons. One, it situates us in a community, almost like a community of practice of people who have common interests, shared approaches, often shared values, a shared set of principles. So that's very much who we are as an organization. We don't see ourselves as standalones. As a standalone organization, we see ourselves very much being a part of a community, and focusing on open source development allows us to keep committed to that. Two, I mentioned trust. One of the salient features of emphasizing open source approaches is the transparency, is there's this kind of shared accountability around what's going into the code, conversations around bias, conversations around use cases, etc. So I think open source from an ethical standpoint works for us because it keeps us in this community that's hopefully keeping each other honest and allowing a level of transparency that you don't often get if you're locked into some sort of private vendor. And then there's just the ability to share knowledge. And I mean, our clients and our partners are so diverse. What excites me is being able to share that knowledge and have the ability to not only scale, but do some customization, contextualize whatever it is that we are creating for specific use cases. And I think open source lends itself to that as well. So we're always champions of open source, Creative Commons licenses, building on other people's knowledge, and we want to be a contributor to that. We want to bring our learning to the table and share it and have people build on what we're learning. One of the projects we're really excited about in the next year is to establish an AI solutions lab, which has been generously funded through the Ontario Trillium Foundation. I'm working closely with CFC on this initiative as well. And we see that as an opportunity to bring, as I said, interested organizations together. The whole idea is that, an organization will be interested in AI. Maybe they don't have the internal capacity to develop a solution on their own. But by coming into this lab and leveraging our expertise, the resources that we'll make available there, we'll be able to engage in co-design, to come up with, and the idea is low cost, lightweight, highly usable solutions that get that organization started on their AI journey, and maybe also lights that interest in going further down the road. And we also see an opportunity to build capacity around answering questions like, what is AI? How should we be using it? What are the risks? What kinds of frameworks do we need to have in place to guide the use and the implementation of AI? Who gets to contribute to those frameworks? These are the kinds of questions and conversations and work that we want to engage in the solutions lab.
Love the work that you're doing. As is for me, like with my organization, Brain Training, we're all thinking very highly about building capacity. And so the next thing I wanna frame my question is, when you're following AI, you have to look at how other industries are shaping, are working, are thinking about it. We didn't just think about corporate world, because it tends to be like where a lot of the articles and research that gets put out about how they are dealing with AI transformations. And we're seeing a shift, right, for organizations who are not longer wanting to depend on consultants, IT consultants, because AI is a big topic, it's a growing topic. It's recognized that this requires a very sub branch that you need to be dependent on. And so the typical idea is like we need to hire consultants to come and do this work for us. But the shift that I'm observing is that more and more there's a thinking to actually try to embed that AI knowledge directly into the organizations because they don't want to have this dependency from external, right? So one of the things I'm seeing is like one of the articles that came up today actually from Google, because I follow this area specifically, how AI is changing the marketing industry because of generative AI. Is one of the industries that is being most affected because of the ability to generate text and copy and different type of content that's being used today. And then this article also emphasizes that when it comes to AI in the marketing, they're very much thinking about creating new roles where like some of these roles, like I said, they're AI specialists embedded into marketing teams, for example, right? So like that, I see that we're actually going to talk about building capacity. What we are thinking about, what we need to be doing, I think, for social impact is to see if we can aim to have that capacity building, to have actually like, AI specialists embedded in organizations. How do we get to that point? And for me, it's like just given the struggles that we face, lack of resources, lack of staff, like we're talking about creating new types of roles, but like we don't have the money to pay for these new roles. We just don't have it. So either we build it within the team or we find a way to make sure that capital is flowing in a way that would actually facilitate how these organizations can keep up with other industries. So anyways, it's not really a question, but it's more like a reflection on all that. It's like, for me, it's like in order to keep up as a sector, we are expected to do something that other sectors or other industries are doing, but we just can't have that because we just don't have the resources to be able to match up to that. So we have a danger to fall behind because of it.
I think it's a very important point you raised, Norman. I'd say that it points to the necessity for us to collaborate and to share resources and to share knowledge in ways that perhaps the private sector doesn't, because they have the deep pockets to do this stuff independently. So I think it just makes the case for deeper levels of collaboration. Logical Outcomes is now grateful to be situated in a number of networks thinking about AI. And we're learning constantly in those spaces, and we're taking that learning back, and we're trying to navigate our way through this stuff. But I would also say part of me likes some of that democratization of the knowledge, and the fact that people have some autonomy now using these tools. But it takes me back to another concern, and that is, I worry sometimes about the homogenizing of voice and outputs. And you're seeing this now, like a lot of proposals, a lot of articles, a lot of it is I don't know if you're picking up on this, but it's missing nuance, it's missing style, it's missing, and you can see that people are using AI a lot now to develop this content. That worries me a little bit, and I hope that we get to a point where rather than a kind of wholesale use of these tools to generate the content, that we'll get to a point where they are in fact just tools, and nuance and style and perspective and standpoint and all these things that are so richly connected to the human experience will still come through, will still permeate in our language, in how we communicate and in that content. I am seeing this kind of, I think Dan Lamont referred to it as a vanilla ice cream effect. And so that concerns me a little bit.
Yeah, it's just to add something very quickly is to what I said previously is like, in some of the things, some of the concerning numbers, like Cinder does, the Canadian Center for Digital Resilience. Wow, I got it right. And one of the reports that they do with him, well, I didn't do it right, but anyways, who I'm talking about Cinder, and they do reports, and one of the reports said like, nonprofits have a shortage of tech workers with less than 1% of the workforce in tech occupations and 5% in other industries. That's a big gap, right? Yeah. Talking about building capacity, having the expertise needed embedded is a big gap. So yeah,
we put out a tool called the Evaluation Planner recently. It's not up right now because we're working on some of the underlying technology that we use to put it out. It's essentially a tool that allows nonprofits and other users to come up with a very basic evaluation framework based on two inputs: a homepage URL for a program and a more specific sort of program level page. And with that, the AI is able to produce a very decent draft evaluation framework. That's work that we would typically do as consultants, right? Historically, for the past 11 years, what that output that you can generate, minutes, is what we would previously have spent hours, if not days, producing for clients. And here we are saying, here it is. But there's a caveat around that. And we say, here it is. We hope it's building capacity and allowing that organization to have the kind of preliminary conversations that they need to have around what they want to measure and what kind of evaluation that they want to undertake. But we know evaluation still has a level of complexity that requires a certain amount of expertise and time and resources. But what we're saying with that, sharing that output is, hey, these tools are out there, and you don't have to start from a place of complete not knowing. We think it's empowering to say to an organization, come together as a team, use this tool and create a draft, create something, create a starting point for your program. And then if there's need to go deeper or the evaluation is, of a complex nature, then of course, reach out and get the expertise that you might need if you don't have it in-house. But that was a very important step for us in this whole AI journey. And a lot of people reached out to me and said, I'm surprised you didn't put that behind a paywall or attach some kind of, you have to sign up before you can download the tool. And we said no, because that would run counter to our whole kind of mindset around being a partner nonprofit in this space. So, but it was an interesting feedback loop that occurred after we shared that tool.
Before passing it back to Alex, here's a question for you. Cinder is the Canadian Center for Nonprofit Digital Resilience. People that heard like, what reports are you talking about? Cinder, Canadian Center for Nonprofit Digital Resilience. They create wonderful reports. So if people have not heard it, Google that big name and reports and read all about how they take the pulse on digital skills and digital transformation for nonprofits. So yeah. Alex.
Wilfredo will love you for clarification. But you said a lot of really important things, Neil, and I want to see if I can weave three of them together. One, you talked about one ability and one focus area that our sector have, maybe multidisciplinary, so multi-sector as well, but that the for-profits potentially don't have, and that's our ability to radically collaborate and really to pool our resources, pull our experimentation. We're not there yet, but I think that huge potential, as you mentioned, how that can help us when we're looking at instead of recreating the wheel, standing on each other's shoulders, to really prevent things like Dan talked about vanilla, you talked about lack of flavor, or really starting to see that dilution in interesting, whether or not you were talking about text or work. I just recently had a conversation with Chao Mugbongo, who runs Mozilla Foundation in Kenya, that works with 7 to 9 different university networks in Kenya with Mozilla Foundation. And we were both part of Victor and Setzi's social economy through social inclusion, the roundtables. And I can't help but to think that that's where Canada should lead, like really leaning into diversity that. We know that Canada is a small country. All things considering, yes, we have amazing expertise within AI research, but we're still small. We need to collaborate, but through kind of the diversity that we have and connections to the world, we have, when we're then thinking about how can we empower communities, nonprofits, bringing in a focus on localized models that often respect oral traditions, to have bespoke models that really reflect that diversity and richness, so we move away from the vanilla and move away from the blandness of it.
Yes.
Because that's rich. I'm just wondering, from your point of view, both in the Canadian space, but how can we lead internationally through that radical collaboration?
Yeah, I think it's, you mentioned Setzi. I think it's working very closely with our partners who are in the international development space, first and foremost. Logical Outcomes did a lot of work in our early days using platforms like DHIS2, an open source health management platform. And, we had international partners came to us because we developed some deep expertise in that space early on. But I think it's being in conversation with those folks who are on the ground, right? And not going down this path of, we're here in Canada, and so now we're going to come to Kenya, we're going to come to Ghana and sort of reinstate this colonial model of we've got it figured out, let us come and help you kind of thing. But rather than that, really identifying who's on the ground there, really trying to understand what they're doing and in what space they're operating, and then in partnership, really sitting down and saying, how do our respective skill sets, how do our respective resources come together to create something around AI that's really special, really grounded in the local, really grounded by the context. So I think it's relationship building. I think the international development space is one that we want to potentially return to in a sort of deeper way now that we are pushing into the Solutions Lab and other AI focused work. I think it's time to have those conversations, but be mindful of how we're having those conversations, having them in equitable, mutually beneficial, reciprocal ways so that we're not, as I said, instating those colonial approaches.
Maybe I'll shift it a little bit into Logical Outcomes has been working with philanthropy and Ontario Trailing Foundation really well to explore AI solutions for grant making, evaluation. I'm wondering, as you're thinking through the AI Solutions Lab, funders like community foundations and CFCS, kind of a connective tissue on that side, as well as international organizations like the Lottery Fund in the UK, are starting to think through not only AI solutions for evaluation, impact measurement, but it's also starting to understand how can we listen to the systems that we're operating in, that we're funding, to understand, together with the community data and transparency in capital flows, to understand inequities and mismatches vis-a-vis community needs and capital flows. Given you have the technical expertise and you work with partners on that side, you have the grant making expertise, and how are you seeing that space really evolving going forward? And are you, through the AI Solutions Lab, thinking how that could evolve to really have an impact and how it can be leveraged?
Yeah, our initial thinking on the lab is small, medium-sized organizations, so the agencies essentially. But you raise a really good point in terms of taking the learning from the lab, perhaps aggregating it in some way, and sharing that then with funders and grant-making organizations so that they can, through our work, begin to understand how to better invest and where there's gaps that they need to address. And so it's a really good prompting and reminder for us to not forget about the funder perspective as we're rolling up our sleeves at the agency level and thinking alongside agencies and their use of AI. There's also an opportunity to zoom out and think about this from that grant making and funder perspective. One of the things that excites me about AI excites me and it's daunting at the same time, is how you can correlate all these different data points, right? So, if we're working with agencies that are in, let's say, healthcare, we're also working with agencies who are looking at community safety. And then we're also working with an agency that's working on housing. I think we have an opportunity in working with a diverse number of actors. We have an opportunity to begin with AI to connect the dots and do some massive sort of analysis at that level that will be very useful to funders. Because it will begin to show the correlations. It will begin to show where there's currently maybe misalignment in terms of funding. That's really exciting, and I think it's one of the ways in which AI can be used positively if we have some guardrails and we do that data sharing ethically. The scale at which we can look at the sector and connect those data points is really exciting, because that's where there's no question that the AI will do kind of analysis at a speed and at a level that just using traditional methods just seems out of reach. But I've said a lot there in terms of, again, trust, ethics around collecting that data, guidelines around sharing that data. So data sharing agreements will become really, really important as we move into different levels of complexity with AI. If we're going to collaborate, we're immediately talking about data sharing, and then those overarching frameworks have to be informed by community. That there has to be opportunities for them to come to the table and say, no, we don't want AI that does this or that, but we're willing to authorize that our data be used in this way or that way, or that AI is used for this purpose but not that purpose. Those kinds of frameworks and guidelines can't be imposed. If we're going to do this, that has to come out of the community that we're working with.
Yeah, so for me, it's like AI is so massive that it touches so many things and so many spheres. It's especially because of that you need that collaboration, because you actually cannot see yours from your own perspective. It's not enough. You need to collaborate. You need to join in hands so that their shared vision can be actually more powerful and more encompassing. And then also, like, we also need to be we also need to be doing within the space age is like to enable people to be more like you, basically, right? Because I was listening to what you were saying, how we need to do what we need to do, and you were I'm sure you were already thinking it's like specifically because this understanding of AI actually allows you to envision how you can actually use the opportunity of that understanding to say, I understand that we can do this better now. We can, like, whatever it will be, right? Collaboration, communication, like whatever it will be. There are opportunities to implement AI. I want to ask a question about the solution that you have, the AI evaluation planner. I think it's an example of, like, you're talking about, somebody seeing an opportunity, a gap, right? And then, builds a solution for it, which in today's world is AI the solution, right? So in your view, just so that people can see themselves and like how to become you, what conditions do you think needed to exist or had to happen for you to get to the point where, like, hey, you see the gap and you found an AI solution? What are the mindsets? What are the traits? What are some characteristics you think people need to have? It was just like, building capacity, of course, to get to this point that we actually want to nurture for more people to do, which is the experimentation and the eventual creation of solutions.
So we learn a lot at Logical Outcomes, and we reflect a lot, and our whole movement towards AI comes out of being inspired by the work that we do. So we learned a ton through a very large project with the Ontario Trillium Foundation, working with over 200 grantees on helping them build capacity around evaluation. And we began to see the pain points, right? Some organizations had a different level of readiness to engage in evaluation than others. Some organizations were in a position to sort of accept frameworks that were being used in that project in the way that they were intentionally designed. Others said, this isn't going to work for us. We need a different kind of an approach, or we need a different measure that's more bespoke to our particular context. So we learned about the importance of flexibility and being agile when working with the sector. And then we also learned that unless the evaluation is meaningful, the data is meaningful to the organization in a way that actually impacts their day-to-day work, you lose interest. You'll see there's a lack of interest. So out of all of that learning over the years and through those projects comes something like the evaluation planner. Because as I said earlier, we've seen so many times where we have to spend so much upfront time helping an agency to think about their program. What kinds of activities? How do we define their activities? What outcomes are they working towards, et cetera, et cetera. And so by using AI and, as I said, some decent web pages, URLs, we were able to build the underlying architecture in the AI and some prompts that produce a decent draft output in minutes. So what we're saying there is, learn, and at the same time do something that's within our resources to help the sector deal with this gap around resources and know-how. People seem to respond to it, and that's what sparked the idea of the lab, because we said, this is interesting. We saw this as well within our capability. We experimented ourselves. We saw a way in which AI could produce an output that would be useful, and we gave it away. And the response confirm to us that there's an interest in working on AI, and we're better off doing it with partners and with agencies than trying to come up with things on our own.
I love that. And just a couple of comments. I feel myself that I've lived because of COVID and afterwards that in so much Zoom meetings that I'm looking for the reaction button so I could respond, and there's no reaction button here. Also, Norman, when you keep on saying becoming like Neil, and I'm gonna date myself as playing basketball for 15 years and growing up under Michael Jordan. The
Like
be
Mike,
like Mike ads are coming up in my head so much.
be like Mike.
But I think as you're talking, it becomes so glaringly obvious why it's important to have connectors and translators who fundamentally understand the technology, but also understand the nonprofit side, because you're obviously not thinking as a shareholder, like profit-driven motives. So you're already thinking through not only the impact, but you're starting to think when you're looking at the AI solutions lab and you're starting to think about what AI can do on a systems level to have our understanding. That's what we need. Like, we really need that connection between the technology and the impact. And our hope, and both mine personally, Norman's, and at CFC, is that we start bringing in multidisciplinary expertise to really have this conversation so that it's ground up technology, but really looking at how it can be influenced. How much are you thinking through that as you're shaping the AI Solutions Lab? Like, when you're seeing the influence it can have, how do we move that towards practical collaboration that's often seen as radical from a multidisciplinary point? And what are some of the challenges that you're facing there?
Yeah, I mean, it's still early days for us in trying to get the lab off the ground. And I'm really liking what you're saying about multidisciplinary, because I'm thinking one of the first things you have to admit in this AI space is that no one knows everything. And for once, it's kind of encouraging because we don't have to deal with this whole pretense around, monopolization of knowledge, or someone's got it all figured out. No one has it figured out. And there's a kind of leveling effect with that. When I think about the lab, and you've got me thinking, Alex, about it, we have to be intentional around. So the whole idea is that we would put out a call for participants and develop a cohort, sort of like a community of practice that would be brought into the lab, and we would collectively work on some tools and then share those out. That's very high level what we're thinking. But what you reminded me is that in that invitation to participate and in the selection process of deciding who we work with, this idea of multidisciplinary approaches is really key, because someone who's thinking about AI as an artist brings a very important lens to the table. Someone who's thinking about AI from a disability or critical disability lens brings a very unique perspective to AI, and so on and so forth. Someone who's a community activist brings a specific. So if we're working on a solution, we will be strengthened undoubtedly by having that kind of access to those different disciplines and perspectives. But we have to be what you've reminded me is we have to be intentional in saying that we invite that's how we see the work of the lab happening, because we could go down the path of putting out a more generic call, having a set of criteria, selection criteria, that misses opportunities to be thinking about creative participants and these different perspectives. So we don't have the know-how, but you've reminded me to think about when we get to that stage. We don't have it right now because we haven't reached that point in setting up the lab, is what I mean to say. But you've reminded me of being very attentive to how we create the cohorts and what perspectives they're coming from, so that we don't end up missing opportunities.
I really like, and I use this metaphor of like AI being like a jagged monster, like a Godzilla, and like you only have a vantage point, and your vantage point, you can only see one part of this giant thing. You need several people's vantage points, and then have a more wholesome perspective. So Alex asked you some question that is not this, so I'm not repeating the same question. But we're always, within the work that we do, we're very trying to learn from others. Like, what are the things that we can do to actually be able to collaborate better? Because we all agree we need to collaborate and we need to like vantage points and engaging with several organizations all at the same time. Because that's important. We need to get out of silos and all of that. But one specific, because I know you collaborated with a lot of organizations and people and work on projects. Is there any example of a partnership or a moment, like an aha moment, like that shifted your thinking and say like, hey, actually when we collaborate, when we co-design, when we share power, we can actually do very interesting things. Is there any moment like that where you realize, wow, this thing actually can make a difference, and it's a big thing, and I wish others can do this.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many examples because our work is always, driven through partnership. But one of the key ones that comes to mind is our ongoing work in developing platforms that integrate financial coaching. We do a lot of work with an organization called West Neighborhood House in Toronto and partnering with them around financial empowerment, financial coaching. And we are the platform provider to that project. And so through that project, we've learned a lot about user experience in platform design. We've learned about tracking user journeys and thinking about longitudinal data. And we've learned a lot about the actual subject matter in terms of tying financial coaching to outcomes like well-being, reducing stress, and other aspects of the quality of life framework. That's a project that Logical Outcomes, in terms of advancing our knowledge in platform building, could not have done without that opportunity to collaborate with West Neighborhood House, Prosper Canada, people like Jeff Klein and others involved there to really think about what it means to develop a platform like that. And that came at a time in our organization's development where we I think, clarified that we had a role to play in not just evaluation, but in system development. That was a really pivotal project for us. And I would say that we've continued since then to be thinking about platforms. I mentioned the Ontario Trillium Foundation work that we did around outcomes measurement, but I would say that the aha moment was we're not just evaluators, we actually build systems for evaluation purposes. And that's just opened us up to a whole range of opportunities that are tech related.
No, that's a great question and great answer. I want to flip to the other side of that question. And first of all, I just want to, when you say, really love that you're sharing that this is something that we need to learn in terms of bringing together multidisciplinary teams. And I think that's the strength of the collaborative network as well, because that's how CFC is thinking about it. That's how a collaborative network is already thinking about it. So I think there's lots of opportunities to really build those bridges that are ready and on the cusp of really being built. But similar to the question that Norman asked about kind of a reflection around an important point in time, what are some parts that you feel are, if unlocked, then we will unlock something transformative? What are some important, whether or not, for example, it's culture and mindset or radical collaboration, what are some key things that if we do this right, you think that we can really go for a home run or really transform impact?
Through AI, you mean?
AI or adjacent to AI, so data, governance, and obviously there's a lot of interconnected things, but if there's something that you see as unlocking.
We talk about data sovereignty a lot, and in that platform that I mentioned with the work with West Neighborhood House and Prosper, we're continuing to think about the idea of portals, individuals having the ability to come into a portal in whatever system that they're interacting with and actually have the ability, the autonomy to disable a function that they're not interested in, deciding who can see their data and when, deciding whether their data can be shared with an entity for a specific purpose. So this idea of having users, and when I think of users, I think of folks in community who are not tech folks per se, but we have figured out how to give people sufficient autonomy and sovereignty over their data that in a far more equitable and participatory way, they can actually negotiate how they want to engage with AI, with tech, and be confident that that sovereignty is being respected. I think that then addresses the trust issue that I mentioned early on. If we can figure that out and reduce the trust barrier, wow, the possibilities of who then wants to engage, feels they can engage, feels a different sense of trust about the technology. It's a game changer if we can figure out how to make data sovereignty real in the systems that we're building and designing together. And we haven't certainly figured that out. There's different experiments that we've undertaken, and it remains on our roadmap when we think about platforms to have data sovereignty, user portals as a core function that hopefully enables a broader range of participation and enhances that trust.
Yeah, so we're just closing off now. This is around the time where, like, as we're closing off, I like to ask this question, like, do you believe in AGI? And if so, when do you think it's gonna happen? Not gonna ask that question because I'm gonna open like a whole, like, big topic here. But just one fun question I thought we could ask you is, as you're somebody who's looking at gaps all the time and you understand AI and have created solutions. Is there any one part of your job right now at Logical Outcomes, all the work that you're doing that you would really like to replace AI for? I'll tell you what's mine right now that's really like I'm gonna figure it out, but like I have to provide a lot of receipts to one of my colleagues because they're tracking the expenses of what do we spend in technology. Like, it's such a pain to just go to the websites and download PDFs and rename files, etc. I'm going to automate this. Okay, so this is in my mind. Like, do you have something like that?
What would I automate? Yeah, there's email, but I don't want to get to that point. I'm seeing features that the AI is at least summarizing the email, and but are those summaries accurate? I don't know. Maybe a way in which the AI at least categorizes, prioritizes, and sorts and kind of presents the email back to me so that I have a better sense of how to organize my day. Maybe that's out there already. I don't know, but
Yeah, I can relate, and I know Alex wants to has some closing thoughts, but either you, Alex, just would like to hear more about. Is there anything you would like to say that you would like to share that we haven't asked you, and anything that just comes to mind in general about our audience, or any closing thoughts yourself?
yeah, just that Logical Outcomes is excited to be, as I said, in these networks, and excited to be having conversations like this. We're a growing team, and as a nonprofit consultancy, we're just delighted to be contributing to these conversations and to be, thinking alongside others around what are we going to do with this technology and what are we going to learn together.
Again, thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate how you hold space in not only the sector, but as kind of like a translator, connective tissue. And yeah, in Norman's words, be like Neil.
Thank you both. This was fun.
Thank you, and thank you everybody for listening. Until next time.